Hello, I'm going to talk a bit about the international university rankings, what they're useful for and what they're not so useful for. My name is Magnus MacHale-Gunnarsson and I'm an analyst at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Why do people care about international university rankings? Well, a lot of people think that research and higher education matter a lot. What's more, not all universities or colleges are equal. Some are better than others. So politicians really want to know how good the universities in their country are. People in charge of funding organizations, giving money to research or perhaps handing out scholarships to students, want to know where their money is put to the best use. People applying to university worry about the job they're going to get when they graduate. And employers want to know if the university degrees that job applicants have are any good. So there are a lot of people who are very interested in university quality. And when a person in, say, Malaysia, about to apply for a master's program and prepare to travel somewhere to get international experience, hears about the University of Gothenburg, he or she probably doesn't have a clue about what kind of institution that is. You can imagine them talking to themselves. Gothenburg, isn't that the guy with the printing press? Oh no, that was Gutenberg. Gothenburg. It's where Batman lives! Oh no, that's Gotham. Gothenburg, where is that even? Must be Germany, right, with that name. No, look, it's Sweden. Wow, Sweden. Greta Thunberg, PewDiePie and cuckoo clocks. My point here is that these days there are so many universities out there that people can't be expected to just know which ones are good. I mean, what do we know about universities in other countries? Sure, we can search for the institution online and find their website, but how much does that tell us? There are fake universities with very nice web pages. Wouldn't it be great if there was some kind of catalog where you could look up all the universities in the world and find out if they're any good? Enter international university rankings. So now we know why people want to rank universities. How do they do that? Well, first they need to figure out exactly what it is they want to measure. So what do we mean by university quality? It turns out that that's a bit more complicated than one might think. Are we talking about research or teaching? And how do we compare research in medicine with research in political science? And what's a good teaching institution? Do we mean a place that attracts the crème de la crème of the students? The institutions that churn out the very best graduates? Or do we mean a place that can take almost anybody, regardless of prior knowledge, and turn them into a highly qualified graduate? What do we mean by a good university? Another problem that arises is that some parts of a university can be good and other parts not so good. Perhaps the research in ecology is excellent and the teaching in psychology is awful in the same institution. Theoretically, we can rank each subject individually, or perhaps calculate some kind of average, but that's a lot easier said than done. People have very different ideas about how research can and should be divided into subjects, and on top of that, people tend to move between subjects, across subject boundaries, and work with problems that fit into several subjects. There is no good solution for this, only more or less bad ones. So as a ranking producer, you need to pick one bad but acceptable solution. And when you look at rankings, you need to keep this limitation in mind. So let's say we have decided what we mean by university quality and found a bad but acceptable way of dealing with academic subjects. Step 2. How do we measure this? Well, for research, we can use bibliometrics. What's that, says you? The idea is that a researcher does some research, writes that up in an article, and has that article published in an academic journal. The article is the output of the research. The ranking producers use databases of scientific journals to measure how many articles each university produces each year. And then, since the databases contain the reference list of each article, we can see which articles are referenced by many other articles and which ones are referenced by few other articles. And we assume that articles that are referenced a lot are better. That way we can also measure the quality of the research, not only the volume. This can be done with more or less sophistication, but it's a fairly established way of measuring research, and if done with care, it can absolutely be useful. I'm a big fan of bibliometrics, although one has to be aware of its limitations. One such limitation is that it only really works for medicine and natural sciences, and parts of engineering and technology. Most subjects in the humanities and social sciences cannot be measured this way, for several reasons, and the same goes for large parts of engineering and technology too. Despite these problems, international university rankings do use bibliometric indicators. It's actually the most dominant kind of indicator, and some rankings only use bibliometric indicators. Another kind of indicator that is used in international university rankings is to look at how much money the institution has. There seems to be a strong correlation between funding and research output. Volume, that is, the correlation with quality is weaker. But anyway, even assuming that correlation, it is a bit circular. Can we be sure that they have a lot of money because they produce a lot of research? Or is it the other way around, that they produce a lot of research because they have a lot of money? In the latter case, money is not really a sign of good quality. How about the quality of education? How do we measure that? National comparisons often use grade averages, selectiveness, or graduate employability, but these cannot be used internationally, and no rankings use indicators for these things. Some rankers use teacher-to-student ratio to measure teaching quality. If you have a lot of students per teacher, then that's a sign of poor teaching quality, right? Perhaps, but that statistic is not really available. The rankers ask for number of academic staff and number of students, and then they compute a ratio. But they don't know how many of the academic staff are actually teaching or how much. A lot of them are researchers only, or mostly researchers. The rankers ought to have used number of full-time equivalent teachers, but they don't have that data. And since, in practice, the variation between institutions in number of researchers far outweighs the variation in actual teacher-to-student ratio, it means that all this indicator measures is research intensity, not teacher-to-student ratio. And research intensity depends a lot on the subject. In relative terms, there is a lot more research done at a science faculty than in a teacher training college. So this indicator is strongly biased towards research-intensive subjects like medicine and natural sciences, just like bibliometrics. Some rankers also use reputation surveys as an indicator. These are worth spending some time on here because they are very problematic. To avoid unnecessary confusion, I should tell you that these surveys are directed at researchers, not students. The surveys have very low response rates, probably around 5 or 10%, although the rankers won't tell us about this, probably because they're too embarrassed. In the surveys, people are first asked which subject they're active in, and they are given a list of subjects to choose from, and they pick the one that suits them best. Then they get to name the universities with the best research in their subject, up to 15 institutions. This is not a good question. Do the people answering the surveys actually know this? It will depend a bit on the size of the subject, but if, for example, the subject is medicine, which it is sometimes, then you have absolutely no chance of knowing where the best institutions are. You might know the best institutions for preclinical research into some special type of lung cancer, if that's your particular field, but medicine? Not a chance. And to make things worse, you might have a hunch about the research if you're a researcher and the subject is small, but the rankers ask about teaching quality too. Who knows anything about the quality of teaching in other universities? It's hard enough to keep track of the quality in your own institution, unless you actually happen to be responsible for a program that semester. So, the survey questions are more or less impossible to answer, and that means that they lead to problems with validity. On top of that, when the questions are put the way they are, it means that almost everybody is going to list the big US American and British elite universities, Harvard, MIT, Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, etc. And yes, the top 30 universities do get almost all the votes in these surveys. It's a very skewed distribution. This means that when you get down to place 100 or 200 or 300, 20 votes can move your university 100 places. And 20 votes in a survey like this, it's just noise, normal variation. Next type of indicator, awards. Academic ranking of world universities and one or two of the smaller rankings look at the number of important scientific awards, such as the Nobel Prize, that the institution has received. This indicator has its merits, but it has two serious drawbacks. First, not all subjects have internationally recognized top awards. There is no Nobel Prize in sociology or linguistics or even computer science. So again, the indicator biases the ranking in favor of medicine and natural sciences. And second, there are very few awards out there, which makes the indicator work okay for the top 20 institutions or so, where each institution has at least 15-20 awards, but after that it becomes rather random. A single award 20 years ago for research carried out 50 years ago can move an institution 50 places. Internationalization. It is assumed that having a lot of foreign staff and students is a sign of high quality for a university. And the good news is that most universities can produce statistics about foreign nationals in their student body and their faculty. So the indicator actually measures what the rankers try to measure. Hooray! However, the assumption that the presence of staff and students from other countries is a sign of quality can be challenged, and frequently is. One could, of course, have defined internationalization in a different way, focusing on relevance and connectedness to other countries, and then the connection to quality would have been less contentious, but the rankers use a more simplistic definition. So, in summary, all indicators used by international university rankings have serious flaws. And for many aspects of university quality, such as graduate employability, teaching quality, or research relevance, there do not seem to be any indicators at all. And remember, all the international university rankings are forced to use the same type of indicators. They put slightly different weights on the indicators, and some use awards and some use reputation, but it all comes down to the same thing. They favor research-intensive, rich, large universities geared towards medicine and natural sciences. And so they all yield roughly the same results. So how can this go on? If international university rankings have such big problems, how come they continue to be published? Well, university rankings are big business. The rankers make money from the rankings. And the universities need to attract students and staff. Ranking position has become a proxy for reputation, and the better your reputation, the better staff and students you can attract. And if you're not in the rankings, then your visibility decreases. Or worse, some scholarship organizations have decided that they only accept applications to universities that are on the top 200 or top 400 or some other number of some ranking. That means that if you're not on that list, then you're disqualified as an option for many students even before the competition starts. A number of times, some university has decided to boycott one or more rankings, and the only effect that has had is that the university has got less exposure, and thus they've attracted fewer students. So the universities are kind of trapped in the rankings game. Okay, international university rankings have enormous methodological problems, and yet people need rankings. Rankings will not go away. So what should we do? Here's my advice. Universities, do not use rankings to gauge your own quality. Use them as marketing tools. Weird ones, but still. Let the Department for Student Recruitment deal with rankings, and not the Department for Quality Assurance. Students, use the rankings as a quick hygiene check. If the institution is ranked, it means that it's real and that it has some research and some teaching. If it's not ranked, then spend more time checking it up. There might be very good reasons for the institution not being ranked, for example that it's too specialized to be included in a general ranking. Then, try to figure out as much as you can about the particular program you're interested in. How many students are accepted into the program? How is it taught? Do the teachers seem to care? Are alumni happy about it? And so on. Do not select one university over another because it is ranked 100 positions higher. You'd be better off rolling a dice. Journalists, do not write about ranking results. It just gives the rankers publicity that they will capitalize on, and they don't deserve that. Let them pay for ads instead. Politicians and funders, do not use rankings to identify good and bad universities. Find your own indicators and use them. For international comparisons, you can use bibliometrics and be aware of its limitations. And for national comparisons, there is usually tons of data available about selectiveness, completion rates, employment rates, external funding, publications, and what have you. It's more difficult and requires more work to find your own indicators, but it does have the benefit of potentially saying something real. International university rankings, by contrast, are just fiction.